So how do we go about acing the case? Okay, so this is the structure of the process. So listening to the case, clarifying the problem, structuring the problem, requesting information, analysing and summarising your findings. It's not a difficult method to do, but doing it in practice is difficult. So this is why it's important to do 20 to 30 cases before you go along to McKinsey, Bain or Boston Consulting Group. So number one, you clarify the problem. So they might say to you, we're a large university and we're thinking of scrapping face-to-face classes and doing everything online. Do you think this is a good idea? And so you recap the problem. So you repeat back to them pretty much what they've said to you, and then you try and ask some clarifying questions. So are there any legal problems with this? What size of university are we talking? Are there already online courses that are being done? If so, what's happened to them? Do you want me to make my recommendation in terms of money alone, profit, or do you want to think about the wider issues in terms of the brand of the university, etc.? You also want to clarify what type of company this is. So you're saying in this case it's a university. Is it a high brand university like Oxford, Cambridge, or is it a fairly low brand university? And are we talking about a university in quite a modern, cutting-edge country, or are we talking about a more traditional university in a country that hasn't had many innovations in their university system? So you might use examples to reflect back what type of company it is. And then you might want to pause, in fact, ask for time to structure your thinking. So you might think, okay, they might have told you that you're focusing purely on profits, and so you're going to say, okay, I'm going to structure this in terms of profits. Can I have 5 minutes to think about how I'm going to do this? And then you think about all the issues that are involved with profit and loss. So what you want to be doing in this case with the university is comparing the profits that they're making in a traditional structure versus the profits that they can make in the new structure. So you're going to think about the costs at the moment and the potential profits, and then you're going to think about the costs in the new situation versus the potential profits. And that's and you can literally write that structure down and say, this is how I'm going to think about it in terms of costs at the moment. I'm going to be thinking about staff, I'm going to be thinking about buildings, I'm going to be thinking about operations, etc. And same with profits and in the revenues. And in the new situation, I'm going to think about costs in terms of recording equipment, hiring staff by the hour, and in terms of revenues, I'm going to think about online courses that I can sell and accreditation. So there's probably going to be fewer cost and revenue points in the second situation, i.e. the online university, than there are in the original case. So you want to structure out your thinking and then present it to the interviewer and say, this is how I'm going to approach this. Does that sound okay to you? If you're really stuck about the structure that you're going to use, think about the frameworks that you already know. Porter's 5 forces, the 4 Ps, the 4 Cs, things that are taught in all the MBA schools. Don't use them, don't just say I'm going to use the 4 Ps. Use them to structure your thinking around the case, and then seek feedback about it. I've created a small downloadable template that you can use. So if it's a question about revenue, you're going to be thinking about volume, price, and the products that you're selling. If it's a question about customers, you're going to be thinking about market size, segments and need, etc. So this might be a useful aid memoir to allow you to automatically go to the things that make sense. The type of examples that typically you'll get is Volkswagen prices have declined, they're losing market share. Volkswagen wants to cut its operating costs by 30%. Volkswagen are thinking of opening a new plant in Poland or of buying Skoda. Now with each of these, what this framework allows you to do is to say, okay, well this is a question about market share, so you want to think about the competition, you want to think about customers, potentially also you want to think about supply chain and revenue. If Volkswagen wants to cut its operating costs, well clearly it's going to focus on the operating costs, which can be costs, processes, supply chain, and the company itself in terms of departments, etc. If there's a new plant in Poland, you can think about this purely in terms of cost and revenue. Maybe some macro stuff, sort of the legal situation, labour laws, unions, etc. VW are thinking of buying Skoda. Again, it's a revenue cost situation. A lot of the case interviews very often just boil down to profits. What course of action is going to bring us the most money into the company? When you request information, it should follow logically from your framework. So once you've sketched out your structure, the boxes, the MACI framework that you're going to be using, you should ask questions for each one of those boxes. So do you have information on market share? Do you have information on competitors? Do you have any information on price points? And do you have any information about I don't know, legal problems of selling in different countries? And this will allow you to go through each of the boxes, and so hopefully your framework will already provide you with a structure. And then the interviewer will give you information. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll give you information that you didn't ask for, which is always a bit nerve-wracking. However, just deal with everything in a very calm, structured way. And when you're asking questions, try to be quite specific. So instead of asking, what are the competitors doing, say, what segments are the competitors targeting, what is their pricing, and how has it changed over the last 3 to 5 years? So try and be quite precise with your questions. Don't ask big general questions. You'll get better marks for doing that. Have your structure in front of you. So once you've sketched out your structure, have that in front of you. Do all your calculations on a separate piece of paper. You can obviously make notes wherever you want, but whenever I'm doing this or I'm coaching this, I always recommend to the student that you keep these things separate so that your interviewer can see where you're going and also your mind doesn't get confused. And do change your hypotheses if you get new data. So if the interviewer suddenly brings out a load of data on strikes, then you might want to say, oh, actually, okay, so I did think this question was going to be about simply focused on profits. However, I realised that it's also going to incorporate some idea of whether countries are unstable for us to work in or don't have a reliable workforce. And so I'm going to amend my structure to bring some of those costs and risks in. So, for example, if we look at the question, Volkswagen prices have declined and they're using market share. You've obviously already asked some clarifying questions about this. This is a question about market share. The prices have probably declined. Again, this is a hypothesis. The prices have probably declined because they've lowered them in order to try and get back some market share. So the key problem here is market share. Am I right in saying that? And the interviewer will say yes or no. The types of questions that you could ask could be around competition. So who are the rivals? What's their positioning? What's their pricing? Who are the new entrants? And what are the substitutable products here? You might ask questions around customers. What are the customer segments? What other segments are there that we could pursue? And what are the needs of these segments? You might ask questions about the supply chain, about revenue, etc., about price points. So you've got a whole set of questions that you can ask that should follow from the framework. So if you've got a framework that's based around costs, you're going to be asking questions about costs, etc. And then you'll do the analysis. So once you've got all this data in front of you, very often the interviewer will give you out worksheets with graphs and charts, some tables on them, and then you're going to analyse those. Now, if your structure is good, if it's MACI, if it's coherent, you're going to just be able to slot this data in, do the calculations, and come up with a final figure. And that's the ideal situation that you want to be in. If you're a bit unsure, do ask the interviewer. Don't ask them all the time, but come up with a structure and say, does this make sense? They'll probably correct you if you're wrong, and do make sure that you listen to their corrections. There's nothing worse when I'm coaching somebody, there's nothing worse than dropping really heavy hints that they're going in the wrong direction and then just ploughing on regardless. You get marks for listening to your interviewer. Break the problem down. So, if you're looking at potential revenues from a country for this new widget that is being developed, you might look at expected sales, which will be based on your market sizing and the number of competitors, and you'll want to multiply your sales by your price points. They might give you various data about your price points. So what you're ending up with is a relatively simple calculation that's going to allow you to predict the revenues from that country compared to other countries. And you know, talk them through your thinking. Say, well, you know, this is how I'd like to get to a point where I've got an idea of the potential revenue coming from this country. You've given me data on the market sizing, you've given me data on competitors, and you've given me data on pricing, so I'm going to multiply it out in this way. And again, if you're wrong, they'll probably put you back on track. And then say, you know, that it's always good to say, once you've come up with a rough figure, you know, there's some assumptions I've made, further investigation would be really useful, it'd be good to get some data on X, Y, Z. And then you want to summarize your findings. So you want to step back and say, well, based on the data that I've been given, this company wants to launch a new widget in a country and it doesn't know which country. So I've looked on the basis of profits, I've looked at the revenues and costs that are going to be present in each country, and I've argued that Japan or France or somewhere in South America is likely to produce the highest profits because it has relatively low costs and relatively high income. And they may ask you questions, they may challenge you on a lot of this. They might say, well, what's your second choice or your third choice? What if the unions are really disruptive in your first choice? What are you going to do? Where would you look for your second choice? So always think about the contingencies, the problems and risks. Think about the information that you haven't been given. And this is where a lot of the creativity comes in answering the case, and you get extra marks for that. Okay, I've given you lots of examples of case interviews that you can download. There's more videos available showing us walking through case interviews with people. So do please look at them. But beyond anything else, please practice. If you go into this having just listened to lectures, having just watched some YouTube clips, you're not going to do well. You need to practice at least with somebody else in your cohort, ideally with somebody who's a coach who has done this several hundred times. Okay, thank you for your time. Speak to you soon.